What happens when a poet with a creative writing PhD writes a fantasy novel? Let's find out. So if you saw my video a couple of weeks ago, you know that it's Austober. And this month I'm reading only Australian fantasy authors. The first of those is E.J. Beaton and her book, The Councillor. This was wildly recommended, raved over by the brothers Gwyn, for which I greatly appreciate it. I might not have started reading this right now if it was not for me deciding to do Austober, and E.J. Beaton happens to be an Australian author, but I'm so glad I read it. So what's it got? Gender equality, a bisexual society, drug addiction, sexual fetish, mysterious magic, crushing poverty, unimaginable wealth, a single point of view character, beautiful poetic writing, an extremely flawed protagonist, terrorists, or freedom fighters, depending on who you ask, love of books, reading and writing, smoldering sexual tension, intrigue, betrayal, prejudice, and a magical secret society. So if you're just looking for a book recommendation, I loved this book. I started reading it, I really enjoyed the prose, and I consciously decided to read it slowly and to reread bits of it and to really savor the prose. And I didn't do that. I ran through it, finished it very quickly in 2 days because it was just so good. So there's your recommendation. Yes, read The Councillor by E.J. Beaton. It's awesome. So what's it about? It takes place in the kingdom of Allura. Allura is ruled by the Iron Queen, Cerilyn Bray. She is in the first chapter already, so it's not really a spoiler. She is quite unexpectedly poisoned and dies. Before she died, she selected Lysand Prior, the court scholar, to be the councillor should she die. The councillor is responsible for choosing from the other rulers inside Allura who should be the next high king or queen. So the councillor has a great deal of political power. She has 4 other rulers to select from, 3 princes and a princess from the different kingdoms that make up Allura. Allura is essentially a put-together kingdom of 5 different ones, and one ruler rules over everything, and then the local rulers in each kingdom take care of their local affairs. So, of course, all of the 4 other rulers want to be elevated to be king or queen, so the councillor has a pretty important job. Lysand, the character who is the councillor, is the court scholar. She was adopted as an orphan by the queen, elevated essentially to the position that she's in, educated to be the scholar. She has learned numerous languages. She's read all the books, it seems like. She's translated quite a lot of them. So is probably one of the better educated or best educated people in the entire kingdom. And she's someone that you can feel in the story. She loves books. She loves words. She loves languages. She loves figuring things out and making connections between different histories and descriptions of things. And if you're a lover of books, which I assume you are, it's so rich and enjoyable to read about her and the connections she makes. But like I said, she's a very flawed protagonist. She is drug addicted. There is a drug, which I won't go into because spoilers, but she uses this drug as a crutch. And if you've ever dealt with anyone who is drug addicted, or you've ever had problems with it yourself, you know the things that go on in your head. And Lysand is the only head that we're in. She's the only point of view character. We are constantly in her head, and we only experience the things that she directly experiences. It's a real mix, however, because she's a very intelligent person, and she's going through the loss of her best friend, the queen. So there are a lot of memories, there are a lot of flashbacks, as well as the things that she's directly experiencing. And it's quite masterfully done that we get all of these connections that she's making between histories, between her own personal memories, and between the here and now. And this is kind of constant. The book is maybe a third memories, flashbacks, thoughts, and maybe 2/3 the actual things that are going on right at this moment. Lysand is also someone that has very strong attractions and sexual feelings. You don't need to be afraid of explicit sexual scenes, but there are sexual scenes in here. It's always described, I think, in a very interior way. They are pretty steamy, but it's her steamy thoughts that's the main thing that's going on. So the book may turn you on. It turned me on. I found that actually very enjoyable. I don't go in for explicit sexual scenes. In fantasy novels, especially, it just doesn't seem to belong. But this is so much who the character is. And it's interwoven, I think, in a very tasteful and sensible way. It belongs in the book. The other big thing that's going on in the story is the White Queen. The White Queen is an elemental. Elementals in this world are people who can use magic, which is primarily about manipulating the elements, therefore elementals. They are pretty much illegal, and there's a heavy prejudice against elementals. And the White Queen is a very powerful elemental who started a war with the queen who dies at the beginning of the book many years ago. It's never really that clear exactly when it was, but it's a while ago. And the White Queen is still out there. She was never killed. She was never captured. And she is very clearly plotting something against Illyria. So this is a parallel thing that's going on all the time. You've got the Councillor trying to select who should be the next ruler, but also she's trying to figure out who killed the Queen, her friend, and what exactly is going on with the White Queen, and when is something going to happen? What might it be? What are her plans? These are all parallel things going on at the same time, and it makes for a pretty exciting story. The themes in the book, obviously, I already mentioned it. Addiction is a big one. She is kind of constantly throughout the entire book. Lysand, the main character, protagonist, she is struggling with her addiction. Sometimes she's giving into her addiction and fully exploiting it. Sometimes she's actually fighting with it. And it's told in a way, I know people who've had some pretty serious problems with addiction, and it's told in a very believable way. The psychology, the thoughts that we are privy to that are going on in her head when she's dealing with her addiction are very realistic. I think E.J. Beaton must also have a lot of experience with it, maybe not personally, but know people. Because it's all very believable, and it's exactly the way that addiction seems to go on in your head. There's a lot, of course, with grief. The book starts, and it's pretty amazingly done. In one chapter, which was only 20 pages, she made me care about the Queen, understand Lysand's friendship with the Queen, the history they share together, and feel pretty wrecked by the end of the chapter that the Queen has been killed and that Lysand is now alone and thrown into a huge responsibility without her friend, the Queen. So grief is obviously a big part of it, and it comes back over and over again. Of course, you don't get over something like that immediately, or not even quickly. So she's constantly thinking about her friend, the Queen, things that she's lost in the past, things in her history that were painful. There's a lot of grief and mourning going on and developing past it as well. Leadership is also a big theme. She's thrust from basically being an orphan, a nobody. She's thrust into the nobility, and then she's thrust above, in a way, the nobility. she becomes the councillor and she has to lead. She has to make extremely important decisions that actually change the entire kingdom. And at first isn't up to the task, or doesn't feel like she's up to the task, and has to grow into her position and becomes more and more confident as the book goes on. It's an interesting world because, and these are also big themes, gender equality and sexual preference. There are, as far as I noticed, no real clearly gender fluid characters. Everyone is pretty much clearly presenting as male or female, but there is no job that is male or female. There are women and men in every kind of position, and this is completely normal. Just in this society, there are some of the best fighters in the entire book are female. Some of the most caring people in the entire book are male. The typically female, typically male roles that are usually presented in fantasy just don't exist in this world. It's not beating you over the head with it. It's not like making some sort of political statement. It's making, I think, a very strong statement about this because it's just normal. It's just absolutely the way things just are in this world. The same thing with sexual preference. The main character, Lysand, she has relationships with women. She has relationships with men. She's attracted to whoever she's attracted to. And this is also presented as completely normal. And there are other characters where it's exactly the same thing. There is no judgment by anyone in society who you sleep with or who you should or shouldn't sleep with or be attracted to. It's just taken as totally normal that everybody kind of is attracted to different people, and it doesn't really matter what gender they are. Where there is judgment and prejudice is it's a very stratified society by classes. The nobles are called silverbloods, and the silverbloods are the most privileged people you can imagine. And at the bottom are people who are literally starving. And there's quite a lot of examination of these differences and Lysand's realization of how these things came to be and what maybe she could do in her position to change them. So there's a fair bit going on about class differences and privilege and prejudice. There's also pretty much a society-wide prejudice against elementals, people who use magic to manipulate the elements. And there's quite a lot of examination of that prejudice as well, how it came to be, why it's there, why it maybe shouldn't be there, and how it could maybe also be changed over time. One of the other big themes is friendship and trust. So Lysand is thrown into this situation where she has to get to know three princes and one princess of these other countries inside Illyria and choose one of them to be the next ruler. She has to figure out maybe if one of them killed the queen, and also judge all of them, which one of them could be the best ruler, which one of them, or maybe more than one of them, can be trusted. Maybe friendships start to grow between her and some of the others, and past friendships change as well. So friendship and trust is a thing, a recurring theme throughout the entire book. So the writing style in this is quite poetic. The author, E.J. Beaton, is actually a poet and has been shortlisted on numerous poetry prizes. So she's pretty good. I haven't read any of her poetry, but it sounds like she's pretty good. So the prose in this is quite poetic. It's not poetry. You don't have to, if you have an irrational fear of poetry, you don't have to worry about it. It's just that it's written in a very rich way. There's a lot of multiple meaning that can be taken out of different sentences that are in it. It bears rereading. There were a number of points where I read a sentence or a paragraph, and I thought, wow, that was interestingly enough written that I'll just reread it just to enjoy the words and how they're put together. The best way to really get it across maybe is to give you an example or two. So this is a scene where Lysande and one of her friends are speaking shortly after the queen has died, and they're talking about what nobles may do. Now that the queen has died, the court is sort of in chaos, and the two of them, and they're both not nobility by any means, they come from lower classes, and they're talking about what the nobility may do. And her friend says, "The queen is dead, and their whole world is wobbling. So they can't seem to find a stable place to stand. And that, my dear friend, is where the danger lies. They will put our bodies in the ground, and they will stand on us." So another example is a bit later in the book. Lysande is meeting with one of the rulers named Cassia, and Cassia, for the first time, calls Lysande friend. And this is what goes on in Lysande's head. "If only you could excavate a word with your hands, burrowing with fingernails to break through layer after layer, to find the real meaning buried beneath the surface. Friend was an opportunity in the world of royalty." Lysande did not trust that she would find something she would like, but she yearned to dig into the word's core all the same, to feel her way to the chambers and spaces within Cassia's lexicon and understand what resided there. So last but not least, let's have a look at the cover. It's quite original and extremely suitable to the story. So I've talked about the difference, the way I think about covers, the difference between an illustrative cover and an atmospheric cover. And this is primarily an atmospheric cover, and it's very simple. The elements that make it up are very simple. We have at the top of the cover, we have a quill, which is, of course, what the scholar, Lysande, our protagonist, what she writes with. And it seems to have drawn a creature, which we know pretty early on in the book is a chimera. And the chimera is a recurring sort of visual symbol and also creature that actually appears in the book. And in the background, we have a whole bunch of writing. I've zoomed in on this writing and I've really tried to see if it's words that I can decipher. And it seems to be made up. I don't know if there's an actual language made up, but it doesn't seem to be English anyway, or any language that I recognize. And the chimera seems to be done in sort of splotches, inky splotches. So it's all really, really appropriate to the character who is the scholar who writes a great deal and deals mostly in words. The bottom half is the title and some decorative elements and then the author's name. I think they kind of missed an opportunity here. It would have been nice, considering that the whole thing has to do with writing with a quill. It would have been really nice to see at least the title done in calligraphy. I really wonder why more publishers don't do something like that and they just use typography. And this is typography that could not be written with a quill. Just the details of the strokes, and it's sort of rough and bumpy on the edges. This doesn't look like calligraphy. It doesn't look like it was written with a quill. And I just think that would have been the thing that would have made this really an A+ cover, is if it was actually custom drawn by a calligrapher. It would have fit so much better. I understand that it's a lot easier and quicker and cheaper to get somebody to do a layout and just get them to use a typeface that's on a computer. But especially for something like this, where you already even have a quill on the cover itself, why not do the typography as calligraphy instead of typography? The jacket, the whole thing, the back is pretty simple. It's a bunch of quotes and a blurb. And this parchment sort of texture. The whole layout, and I believe that includes all of the illustration on the front, because there's no other credit. It says jacket designed by Adam Auerbach. I'd be really interested eventually to talk to designers who do covers, maybe art directors at publishers who are in charge of covers, and really get a better view of how this works, because this is so close to an amazing cover, if only the typography. Anyway, that's the Councillor. And the cover, I would give it a B+ for sure, maybe an A-. It's a really nicely done cover that extremely well suits the book that it's on, without giving too much away and without resorting to a character portrait, which I think is absolutely excellent. If you didn't already pick it up, yes, I think you should read The Councillor. I really enjoyed reading The Councillor, and I pretty much right after I finished it, I thought, I am going to reread this book. It's the kind of book, just because of the richness of the prose and the interesting story with many levels of meaning and suggestion that's going on, I think it's definitely worth rereading. It's different for me, because it does have quite a lot of sexual stuff going on, thoughts mostly. There's only, I think, 2 or maybe it's 3 actual sex scenes, which are mostly interior. But most fantasy that I've read doesn't have a whole lot of sexy anything going on in it. And this was a nice, refreshing, and sort of exciting departure from that. Although none of it's explicit. It's all very suggestive and poetic. But the story is also quite interesting. It felt like maybe towards the end it was a little bit rushed, and action isn't so much E.J. Beaton's thing. The action scenes were sometimes a little confusing and also felt a little bit rushed. But overall, the character relationships, the tension, sexual tension, political tension, intrigue, a very interesting but mysterious magic system, which is only hinted at and shown a little bit in this book. This is, by the way, the first in a duology. There will be a second book. I have heard it's coming out next year. We'll see. I don't know how dependable that is, but it's listed on Goodreads as coming out next year. So I'm really looking forward to reading the second book, and I'm sure that eventually I will reread The Councillor. So I hope that this is a good recommendation for you, that it sounds like something you might want to read. I'd love to hear what people think of this book. And as always, keep reading awesome books, and I'll see you next time.